Mate.
We're in, I think.
Okay, we're good.
Right. So, welcome to the first ever episode of What's It Like To. Today we have got Mark Gray. Mark is a former client of mine who took on the fairly bonkers challenge of rowing for 24 hours. Mate, do you want to just say a little bit about, your background, sporting work, just sort of minute or so, just, over, view of what you do and what you've done before, and then we'll get into a little bit more.
Absolutely. Well, bless you, and thank you very much for inviting me onto the podcast. Quite excited to sort of share my story, if you like. So bit of a background to me. I am sort of late 40s, someone who never been a professional athlete, but I've always had a sort of keen interest in exercising, going to the gym. My background, if you like, was fundamentally focused around rugby, certainly from a school point of view, and then sort of even after school, playing into my sort of mid-20s. And then beyond that has really just been a sort of an interest in keeping fit and healthy. Sort of little challenges that I've set myself over the years might include something like body transformations, where you sort of do a bit of bodybuilding style training and maybe do a photograph or a competition at the end of it. I've also, and I was thinking about this morning, one of the other challenges I set myself during lockdown was I had a Concept 2 rower, which I bought really just for cardio at home. And I thought, let's see if I can do a marathon on this thing. And did a bit of research about, right, what's it like to do a marathon? What do I need to do? Spent a few months training. And I don't even remember lockdown. It got really hot at one point and we were trapped at home. And it was ideal. I was in the garden, sunning myself on the row machine. Managed to do quite a decent time, actually. But then after that, so that's 2000, and after that, hadn't really done an awful lot of sort of personal challenges. Moved house and had a son in sort of 2019, child that is. So beyond that, I didn't really sort of have anything else other than just doing sort of little bits of personal fitness. And then we reached a point sort of maybe just over a year ago where we were sort of contemplating doing a row, and I say we because you and I had a sort of conversation about it, and that's where we sort of set our challenges and sights on the row challenge.
Yeah, and this is something that I had never done before, but of course, I just thought, well, surely we'll just go through principles, right? So we've got an event, we'll think about how we work back from it, and then we'll go from there. And I think it was when you said it to me, I was like, I mean, this sounds amazing. It sounds absolutely bonkers, but it sounds absolutely amazing. And I suppose just during this podcast, we'll go through the training, we'll go through some of the pitfalls, maybe. I know that there was a little bit of an injury sort of in there as well. We'll talk about the nutrition because that was a huge point, wasn't it? And I think that was something we both learned a huge amount from. Yeah. And then we'll talk about, mate, what it was like on the whole 24-hour day. I mean, so why did you want to do it? What was that? Well, firstly, you're doing it for charity.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about that just a little bit?
Yeah. So the main reason behind me, some time ago, and I would say this is 5, 6, maybe 7 years ago, I'd heard about people, and I think maybe just via Instagram, seeing people doing nuts and sort of crazy things on these rowers. And I thought, I'm okay on the rower. I enjoy it. And I find it quite a decent form of doing cardio fitness outside of running. I've never really enjoyed running. I wouldn't say I'm particularly great at it. But same. With the rower, exactly, I understand it. But a lot of people are the same, and certainly rugby players, we're probably slightly on the heavier side of the most of the general runners out there. But rowing, I seem to sort of, my body type seems to lend itself quite well to sitting on the rower and doing cardio. So, but I thought, well, what's a decent thing to set yourself as a target? And in my mind, I've always thought 24 hours would be quite good to do. Not many people do that. And it's just something I've had in the back of my brain, a bit of a sort of be in my bonnet about it. One day I'll give it a go. And it just so happened that when you and I connected sort of some time ago, a year and a half or whatever it was ago, I just thought, now it's time to do it. I could do this now because I've got the setup. We sort of moved to Devon 3.5 years ago, sort of built an outdoor office and gym, and I thought, I've got the space, I can do it here. I don't need to go to a facility and as a triathlete might need to do, to go to swimming pools, do swimming, and then go running, go cycling. I can just do the rowing machine in the gym here. So That's how it all came about, really. It was just a little bugbear of a challenge. I thought I can do this, and then I was sort of saying, right, I want to do it before I'm 50, so let's get cracking with it, and that's where we are.
Because you were, I mean, look, just there's a little bit of context for everyone. You know, you're a fit guy, you're quite big, you know, your strength scores are pretty decent. And like you said, you sort of lent yourself to rowing, which is why, you know, when you came to me, I thought this is achievable. I think that's the first thing, just to mention that this is, you know, you are a fit guy, you are built well for this, and you've done a lot of training, so your background is solid in strength training and essentially in rowing. So I suppose, you know, just if people are thinking about it, you know, just so everyone knows, you are, you know, you're a decent athlete, and also pretty mentally, don't even know what the word is. I mean, you're pretty driven to do something. Once you get something in your head, there was sort of no stopping you, really. I mean, with life, so I suppose, how did the training routine affect, you know, day to day for you? And think about, like, at the start it wasn't too bad, but I suppose as time went on, how did you sort of cope with the routines and how that changed?
Yeah, really good question. I am a creature of habit, and I think many people are. I'm not suggesting I'm the only one out there, but certainly for me, life is a lot easier if you have a routine and structure about it. And that, you know, everything from the point you wake up to the point you go to sleep, I try and have sort of certain things throughout my day that I want to achieve. And, you know, I might even write a list of what things I want to have done by the end of the week type thing. So with my training, I focus and I approach it in the same sort of manner. Whereas I try and train first thing in the morning, try and train before everyone else gets up in the house. So I'll get up early and go, so that's where I structured it. And I tried to limit the effect, and certainly currently try to limit the effect of my training has on family life. So if I can get it done before everyone else is up, it's great. The impact of this, of doing a 24-hour row, is you're rowing for 24 hours, and part of that training means you're going to have to be doing long stints of rowing. And we're not talking, let's say, an hour session, which, you know, if you haven't done any rowing before, an hour sounds like a long time on a row, which it is. But when you're doing 24 hours, you're going to have to do training sessions which are outside of your general strength and conditioning, your weights and your stretching, what have you. There are long periods of time where you have to be sat on that rower. And I was just looking back before on my training schedule. I mean, there were some sessions where I was doing 10 hours, 8 hours. So realistically, you know, that's going to have an impact on your family life. So it's going to I had to have the buy-in from the missus and say, look, this is what I'm going to be doing, and giving her a sort of a heads up. Okay, this week, this is what I've got on. So I'm going to be something on my screen that's come up. This week, this is what I've got on. And can we try and fit it around, obviously, school pickups and drop-offs and everything else? And there was most of my longer row sessions, we tried to make on Saturdays and Sundays where it didn't impact on school drop-offs and things like that and school pickups. So yeah, I think it impacted heavily in the respect that I had to make sure that my long training sessions didn't impact too much on family life. Any longer sessions I was doing during the week, I try and do it early in the morning, to get up early. Let's say get up at 4 and do it's a few hours session before work. Nutritionally, and I know we'll go into nutrition.
We'll come to that in a minute. Yeah, we'll get to that.
Sure. But trying to make sure that I was eating food, and I had to obviously give, I mean, you know, however we're doing the shopping, if we're having deliveries in or going to get it, to make sure that this is what I've got on this week, this is how many calories I need to be doing, yada yada. Again, we'll talk about that. So nutrition wise, absolutely, I had to make sure that I had buy-in as well, because me just having the amount of food I was eating and the number of times I was eating, it didn't always fit in with you know, what we're having as a family. So yeah, you had to have the buy-in from the family, and work to a certain extent. There were certain things where I had to limit myself. So if I knew I was having a long session in the morning, I might not be able to have an early morning meeting, for example. So can I push that meeting back a little bit because I'm going to be on the rower?
Yeah, but from a routine perspective, that was something that I was almost trying to do slightly less with you, I think, if you remember. So you said to me, look, I just like to have something to do daily. Like, yeah, if I can do that and have Sundays off, that works for me. And that was something that, you know, I think this is the thing with person to person, isn't it? It's like, well, what do you like? How does it work for you? And you said, look, if I have a day off, I just don't feel like it works for me. I just want to do these things. So we sort of planned the program in and around that. and sort of Sunday was your day off, depending on whether we were long rowing. Should we get into? I mean, I'll talk a little bit about what we did in the sort of early stages, and maybe we'll just talk about up until you had the little bit of a back injury, how we sort of managed that, and then because that sort of separates us into two sort of training blocks really, and they were slightly different, I think, weren't they?
Yeah.
So when we first started, I mean, my thought process was very similar to what I would do, almost in a rugby sort of perspective. I wanted to rebuild. I wanted to build muscle, and I wanted to get you strong. Okay, but then I wanted to ponder, well, what parts of your body actually need to be bulletproof?
Yeah.
And like we really need to toughen up. And then, long term, what are the strategies we're going to use? Because you're going to be sitting in a row position for a long time.
Yeah.
And I think so for the first few months, first month was sort of a hypertrophy focus with sort of base building intervals, wasn't it? That's where we sort of built out just sort of like a general prep phase. And then we went through a sort of couple of months of pretty decent strength work, and we just built out the intervals just to get a little bit longer, just so we continue to build that base up. And again, just my thought process was, if we can get you as strong as possible, if we can get you as robust as possible, and as if we can look at those things that are going to need to be super robust for the row, but also if we can just make sure everything else is staying stretched enough, and we have a balanced approach. Okay, so you're going to be rowing a lot, so we almost needed to. We did some rowing, like weights rowing, but actually we sort of needed to offset that with the movements that you're not doing week on week. And I think that was my sort of focus in the first few months. Now then, there was the back injury, and I think this is quite important to talk about, because when you're doing stuff like this, I think people expect it to be this sort of lovely, line up, better, complete. When actually, when you're putting yourself through these things, it's rough. It's really rough on the body. And you've played rugby, like you said, you've got old injuries, and niggles do pop up a bit, right? Because there was a few. The back was the sort of biggest thing we had, but I think during that time, you were quite. You seemed not overly worried about it, because I think you've hurt your back before, but also I think we just discussed, didn't we, that it sort of didn't fall at a bad time, because we did sort of this huge block, and actually it gave us a chance just to sort of take a step back, work on some weaknesses, actually give you a little bit of rest.
Yeah.
And really sort of fix that, and then have a bit of a deep dive into why that back went. And we spent 2 or 3 weeks probably getting it back to where it was, and it was over Christmas as well, so it was sort of lucky.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just think it's important for people to know that, look, stuff like this happens, and I think it's nice to have someone to discuss with, why they think that's happened, how we solve it, and not just to sort of, for want of a better word, sort of shit the bed about it and think, God, this is all going to go to pot, when actually it's not, because the base you'd built in the first 3 months, for the sake of 3 weeks, when we were still doing stuff anyway, actually didn't affect you too much. Would that be fair?
Absolutely. You're right. It did fall at quite an opportune moment. It was during the Christmas period, which I knew, obviously, around Christmas time, your nutrition tends to go to pot a little bit. And I also knew that there's going to be a degree of letting the foot off the gas anyway, because it was Christmas, and there might be Christmas Day, obviously not training if around it. So, but yeah, you're right. I had years gone by, my back has, and I don't want a technical term, popped, the lower back, and it was just a little bit of frustration. But I knew I had you to lean on to the extent that, in order for me to fix it, I thought I can give it rest, but I don't want to if I rest it too much, all that hard work, which I'm going to lose my gains, bro, type thing. I didn't want to sort of limit my fitness go to pot too much. But I like you said, I like to do something every day. And even if my back's injured, there's always something I can do, even if it's just some gentle stretching, just coming in and mentally making sure that at least I'm doing something. Even though I was sort of doing it rather delicately with the lower back injury. But there are certain exercises that you were able to advise me on, which, again, I hadn't come across before. My extent of my training knowledge probably goes back sometimes 30 years. But it is 30 years old in some cases. So some of the stuff you were teaching me and telling me, I thought I hadn't seen this before, which is really beneficial. And there were just little simple exercises that I was sort of including to my training, or even not my training, just including to my stretching, which helped alleviate the pain. And over a period of, like you said, 2 to 3 weeks, I knew I was sort of getting over this injury far quicker than I had done if it was just me on my own, just sort of trying to, I'll push through it type thing. Again, that old mentality of you're fine, just push through it. It'll, the injury will come out the back end of it, it'll be better. It needed a little bit of, obviously being slightly older than I was 30 years ago, that injury is going to take a little bit longer to recover. So yeah, I think it was just a case of making sure that I was listening to you, taking your advice, and not just, right, it's okay, just do some heavy squats, you'll be fine. Because I think that was the problem, actually. It was a heavy squat which probably shot me. It's back squats. But
I think so just to cover off a little bit of nutrition before we get into the interesting bit of nutrition. So that first block, essentially all we were trying to do was maintain weight, right?
Yeah.
So you were about in and around 100, is that right? 100
yeah, sitting about the 100 mark, which I have done for years, to be honest, around the 100k mark. And I hadn't tracked my calories for quite a while. I know if I look at a plate, I can pretty much give a gauge on what the calorie content is, or what the macros are, a plate of food, that is. But I'd never really been too fussed, because I sort of kind of, right, if I feel like I'm getting a bit too chunky, I'll just pull back on the amount of food I'm eating. Or if I feel like I'm weakening somewhat, I'll just up certain aspects of it. But yeah, it's towards certainly in that Christmas period. Christmas, I know I'm going to eat more food anyway. Most of us do. So yeah, the first block of training was just making sure that we weren't about putting on muscle mass or anything. It's just about making sure strength was going up. And in order to make that happen, we dialed up the food a little bit. I was tracking my food a bit more, using some apps that you advised me on, which are great. In fact, really useful. And I do lean them now a little bit, if I'm honest. But they just allowed me to then sort of put my food into what food I was eating into the app, which then gave me an output and sort of gave me a rough idea of what my calorie intake was throughout the day. And then we sort of allowed, on each of the days I was training, we could adjust it somewhat to make sure it focused around what of a session I was doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was it. I think it's important to know, especially when you're doing this sort of thing, it's important to know exactly what's going in and out. Now, a lot of people don't like to track calories, and they're like, But actually, a lot of the time, I think people think about it from a bodybuilding perspective. It's like, well, I need to weigh every single thing. I need to do this. I need to do that. And I think that's fine if you're trying to do bodybuilding stuff. But actually, my view on it is, if you track it and you're 5, 7, 8% out, you're a damn sight closer than you are if you don't know.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people worry about as soon as you say tracking calories. Oh, do I need to weigh it? Do I need to do this? Well, no, actually, no. As long as you just hazard a guess. And the nice thing about the app we use, the Carbon Diet Coach app, is it adjusts things anyway. So that's my favorite app for tracking anyway. And I think that was great. Just quickly, this just gave me a 5-minute warning till the end of my thing. Does it just continue to run? Is it just because
it might shut off? If it does shut off, you can set up another link. We can do a meeting just off the back of this. It's not a problem. Sure. Yeah, it does walk it back.
I did say it was going to be spit and sawdust. Hey, first one.
Yeah, that's right.
Anyway, and then so then sort of building into the second block. Now, really, this was just where do we need to be?
Yeah.
Where are we now? How do we get to that point? And what's the longest row you feel like you need? Now, we didn't quite know, did we? I don't think we quite decided until a little bit further on how long that final row was going to be. But my sort of thought process now, obviously we were training sort of 5 times a week. We brought in a little bit of yoga, didn't we?
Yeah,
a little bit of yoga. Yeah. But my sort of view was every other week we would do a biggie.
Yeah.
So it would almost be like, 3 hours, 2 hours, 4 hours, and it went up slightly quicker than that. But can you remember so we sort of built up to there, didn't we? And then we had a little bit of a fail. And what was that? The 9?
Yeah, you're right. So the way we worked it out is post Christmas, we still hadn't set an exact target date for when we were going to do the road, but we knew that we needed to dial up the training because we wanted to get it done. I was looking at sort of until summer, sort of July time, June, July. And I remember saying to you, we'll just do it when we're ready. But we knew we needed to ramp things up. We sort of set a soft target of July. And then this is come Christmas time, and so we're sort of ramping those longer sessions up. So you're right, we're doing the longer rows every 2 weeks to give ourselves enough time to recover. Because whilst you think you've recovered, if you're doing long sessions like that, let's say 2, 3, 4 hours, and you haven't done them a lot, it takes some time for your bum to recover. Again, sorry to be crude, but you do get a sore bum.
I think we need to get into these things in a bit.
Yeah, we will.
I think that's important.
Absolutely, it is. But I think those longer rotations. So it was the 9 hour. No, it's an 8 hour session, and we set ourselves a slight target in time wise, the 8 hours, and I couldn't hit it. I hit to the point. It was around 6 hours. I think it was 6 hours. The 6 hour mark in that 8 hour row, and I got to a point where I said I can't continue, and I felt like a bit of a failure. Like, you'd set me a target, I hadn't achieved it. I thought, how the hell am I going to do 24 hours? And I can't even do 6 hours or go beyond 6 hours. And mentally, it's quite a challenge because you think I can't do it. But I think the biggest thing was it allowed us, you and I, to sort of sit back and think, right, what went wrong? And fundamentally, it was about me going out at a pace which I couldn't do at the time. And I was starting off too fast, getting too keen, thinking I'm Billy Big Boy, and it didn't work at all. I fell off. The wheels fell off. But it allowed us then to just reset things, and mentally for me to think, right, you're not bulletproof. You are going to have failings, and you're going to make sure that we go into this slightly more gently than you probably think you can. That's probably the main problem for me.
Yeah, and that was also when we had quite a deep dive into the sort of nutrition on the day, right?
Yeah.
So we had a look into it, and we sort of, now again, it's quite important to explain. I think you can look at research and you can look at numbers and you can look at, what you should be having, but person to person, it's really quite different. And actually, again, we can talk about this on the actual row, but there's a certain level of food people can eat. There's a certain level of sort of gastric discomfort that people can cope with. And I think if you're going to do any sort of endurance event, you have to have tried the nutrition before you start.
Yeah.
And you have to have tried it quite a long time before, because you need to find that sort of sweet spot between getting enough carbohydrate in and, either feeling sick or just not doing, just not having the energy to get through. And I think this is a huge thing that I see with a lot of endurance, not, even not people doing challenges, but just endurance athletes. They just haven't considered it, and they just haven't trialed it. They haven't seen how much they can get in, and they, you get the same outcome because your body just doesn't have the fuel to do it.
Yeah.
And we ended up settling on about 70-ish grams an hour of carbohydrate, didn't we?
Yeah.
And that seemed to be the one that during the training. So with those long rows, we tried sort of anywhere in and around that, essentially, didn't we? And we sort of, and it was just feeding back. And also it's, what that looks like.
Yeah.
And again, I think maybe we'll talk about what that looks like when we get into the actual day, because that's quite interesting. So so we got up to, what was your longest time? Just so everyone knows, the longest row, the longest warm-up row was.
Well, the longest row we managed to achieve prior to the 24-hour event was 16 hours, which was a challenge in itself. That was just getting out early on a Saturday, going throughout the whole Saturday into the night, into the late evening. But prior to that, we'd ramped up. We'd gone from 3 to 4 hours. We did a 4, 5, 6 hours sort of around about Christmas period last year, and then we started to slowly get it up every sort of few weeks. We'd sort of add another hour, another 2 hours, and then we sort of hit a point, like I said, where I failed at the 8 hours, and felt like I'm not going to do this. Again, the point is that self-doubt kicks in a lot. And when you're sat on a rower, running machine, whatever you do, for those periods of time, you've got a lot of time to think. And during that 8 hour, I remember thinking, how am I going to do this? I'm not even doing a quarter of the event, and I'm failing here. And by failing, I mean your body feels like it can't continue. You're mentally just stuffed. Your body's sort of feels like it's in a bit of a shambolic state. So it's a feeling you don't often get, I don't think. Certainly in normal work life, I certainly don't do it. as an occupation, I'm a designer by trade, so I do nothing remotely physical. The hardest thing I do is pushing a mouse. So doing something physical like this is not something I'm very much used to, if you like, day in, day out. So it was getting over those massive periods of self-doubt and those sort of and the blocks after Christmas, which we were doing. So the challenge was done in July. So 6 months before, I had to get those out the way, really. And I'm glad it happened because, like I said, it was one of those things that I thought, if I can get over this now, I've still got a few months where I can get myself back on track.
Yeah, absolutely, and that was important as well. Give yourself enough time, and I suppose during those warm up rows, what did you learn about things like the prep? So what did you have to think about prep wise? So let's go into it all. Let's go into toileting, eating, wheeze.
Well, I think one of the first things we hadn't done from the outset, which I'm glad we didn't. I wanted to find my feet. Is you got your 24-hour point stage. So what is that 24 hours going to look like? Are you going to row for 6 hours straight, have a 10-minute break, and then drive for another 6 hours? So we trialed different things, what worked. And I knew in my mind what I wanted. Again, I'm about numbers. I love analyzing numbers. I'm looking at profit and loss sheets, looking at spreadsheets, and it sounds quite boring. But to me, I wanted to see what this looked like. Right? How can we optimize my time on the rower, optimize my break? So within my breaks, I knew that I had to, number one, have a toilet break. Whether I need it or not, I needed to make sure that time is available to me. Two, make sure I can get some hydration on, because whilst you're rowing, it's very difficult to drink at the same time as rowing. So I thought, right, in this sort of break time, and then also wanted to make sure I had enough time to take on enough nutrition. So I hydrate. So it was toilet break, nutrition, and hydration were the most important things to me on those breaks. So through trial and error, we managed to work out a sort of ideal sort of time. Now, this is what I started to try in my 4, 5, 6 hour sessions. Is we'll row. I think we tried to do 50 minutes with a 10-minute break. So hour blocks, 50 minutes rowing, 10-minute break. So in that break, we gave ourselves enough time to do those things. And we also found that I was starting to get sort of my hand starting to become a bit numb. So we sort of, Andy suggested a few things, and one of which was to actually put my hand into sort of a bowl of ice, if you like, just for a couple of minutes in my break, just to allow the blood to sort of recirculate or sort of regain circulation once I pulled the hands out, and that really helped. So
just on that, just before if you don't, so the reason I asked, so there was a little bit of research a while ago, and it's basically about hand cooling, and essentially what they talk about is, whenever you get hot, I don't know if you remember in like science, the enzymes, when they get in your body, they get slightly too hot and they deform and they can't work as well. I don't know if you remember the sort of Pac-Man enzymes. You remember seeing that in school? And sort of the thought process about hand cooling or feet cooling is that when you cool your hands, it actually cools your whole your sort of core down. So if you were to put cold on any other part of your body, it would just cool the skin. Whereas actually, if you can just cool your hands, it just reduces your whole sort of core temperature, and those enzymes they can function again because you've brought the temperature down to sort of optimal. Now, it's just really, it doesn't need to be too cold. It just needs to be sort of cooler than. It needs to be cool water or a cool you can actually get some hand cooling devices these days. It's just a really interesting thing. And there was like I said, there was a study out of Harvard. I think there was a bit on it on the Huberman podcast, but it was it's an interesting thing, and actually it's certainly worth trying. Little bit of a fact.
It did.
But, for something like this, it's a huge thing.
It helped massively, and it really, again, it's one of those things that was holding me back a little bit. So I was starting to notice in the longer sessions that my numbing hands were meaning that I couldn't grip the handles correctly, certainly in the longer rows. So it just gave me that bit more time. And interestingly enough, over a period of a few weeks after that, having continued to do it, I found I was having to do it less and less. And actually, during the row itself, I didn't really have to do it very much. It really just happened. So whatever we were doing helped dramatically to the point where I didn't actually need to do it. So going back to your question about how it was structured, that's how we sort of fundamentally sort of came to the idea of, right, we actually ended up doing 52 minutes, because I found that 10 minutes, I didn't need full 10 minutes for fitness or to do all the things I need to be doing. So 8 minutes, it became the optimum time, and it allowed me enough time. I wanted to try and make sure I was achieving certain distances throughout the sort of each hour block. So I knew that added up, I wanted to, I know I've spoken about this before, Andy, and you laugh, I think, but initially when I thought I could do a world record here, this isn't something that a lot of people do. And I started to sort of had my head about what these world records look like. And again, I was humbled somewhat sort of early on when I just sort of thought, I'm not going to be able to do these world records. I can do, all I can do is what I can do, and know what I can achieve in that period of time. So that's when I sort of thought, right, just do what you can do. Forget about world records here. And I think that's where we got to. 52 minutes on, 8 minutes rest, and then that's how it sort of mapped out for the 24 hours.
Yeah.
In fact, for the last hour, we did an hour.
Yes. Yeah. Because it would have finished.
Yeah, 8 minutes earlier. So I'll just keep going.
Finished. Yeah, absolutely. All right, so to the day then. How were you in the morning? How was?
Yeah, it was. I think.
And tell us about the prep. So just because I'd love people to just visually understand your little feeding stations as well.
Yeah. Well, interesting. Going back to your previous question, actually, very quickly, what I didn't sort of discuss is on the longer row sessions. It isn't just about rowing during that day. It's also the previous day and sometimes the day before that. How's your tummy settling? What sort of nutrition you're taking on board? Making sure I'm not going out for let's say, a takeaway curry or something the night before, because it's not going to provide me optimum efficiency on the row the next day. So it was just making sure that the days before the row, I was eating the right foods and I was sleeping enough, going to bed early, yada yada. So on the day, I had practiced weeks up to this, making sure that, again, you're probably getting this gleaming from this already. I like things to be as efficient as possible. And I was all about making sure that I could sat on the rower in my sort of gym here close to me, I could access my water. So I had a water station with all my hydration, carbohydrate powders, my gels, all set up, and I'd set them up on the table. I'd mapped it out. So I had 24 squares on the table, and within each hour, I worked out when I needed the most optimum amounts of nutrition. So as we said before, 56 grams of carbs, which kind of looked like, I'll briefly tell you. One slice of
I think this is the most interesting bit, honestly.
Yeah.
I think people will want to know what that looks like. I mean, what do you eat? I think that's because you can look at numbers and you can look at 50, 60, 70 grams carb, but what
does it look like?
For you works, what went in, and even
you make a good point. It is very personal, and we trialed this and we trialed some more. So 50 60 grams of carbohydrate to me generally look like one banana, one high carbohydrate gel, which I hated the idea of drinking gels. I thought they were disgusting, but I got over that and actually found them quite a useful tool, because they're so convenient. You get enough carbohydrate in such a small amount of sort of volume. So you've got banana, a gel, and possibly a pita bread, and that pita bread was just lightly toasted and it had peanut butter and jam in, just a bit of taste. But all of that ended up being around about 60 grams of carbohydrates, roughly. And so I had that mapped out pretty much all there or thereabouts for 24 hours. But I knew going beyond the 16-hour mark, which we hadn't really gone on to, I didn't know how I was going to feel nutritionally. And whilst I'd set up a little tent toilet in the back of the office, or just outside the office here, just if I needed to, I could go and use it. As it happened, I didn't need to use it. I had a wee pot, like a urine pot, you'll probably like they have in hospitals. I could stand up, turn around so no one could see, have a wee in my pot so I knew there's liquid going through me, but I didn't need to go to sit down toilet at all. So it kind of helped me in terms of time. What it did mean, though, because of the position you're in when you're rowing, when you're eating this food, it's not moving in the same way it would do if you were running. So your body's not sort of able to allow your food to move through its internal normal routes, because you're sat crunched up. Whilst in my 8 minutes I'm stretching and trying to move things around a little bit, it's quite different. It's a different, even when you're swimming for the long period of time. So So that's how I structured the studio. So I had nutrition next to me, I had my toilet close by, I had and all set up into portions. So I knew that within my 8 minutes, I knew exactly what I was going to be doing. And I also gave myself a few minutes to interact because I was recording myself for a purpose of YouTube, and I had people who were sponsoring me. They could see me doing the row, and people can interact and type in and stuff. So I gave myself a minute or so every couple of hours to interact with that. So yeah, it was all about being as efficient as possible, so making sure that I was maximizing every bit of my spare time when I'm not on the rower, just to make sure that I could survive the challenge.
And okay, so into the challenge then. What was that? Where were the toughest spots?
The pain points.
Where
Well,
were the
interesting
pain
enough,
points?
I knew that I'd hit a wall at 8 hours, so or 6 hours in fact. So I knew that in my challenge, if I get past that 6 hours, I should be okay. Because these sort of, when we talk about the wall, it's very much a runner's sort of terminology, but it can be related, you can relate it to anything endurance related, maybe not endurance related. Even during a sprint, you get a point where it's going to be bloody hard, you've got to push over it. But I had my pain point. I'd gone beyond the 6 hours, but I got to hour 9. So I started at 6 a.m. in the morning. It wasn't a bad day out weather-wise, and I felt sort of quite confident. It was dry, you know, I felt good physically, and I knew that mentally I was sort of set. I had all the support around me. I had my sister here, whose charity I was doing it for. My partner Lorraine was here, and so it was all going really well. But when you're sat in the rower, hour 9, I hit this wall where you start again. Periods of self-doubt. You start to think, why am I doing this? What am I doing it for? Could I give up now? What does that look like? If I do give up now, how does it reflect on me? You start to think these things, and then through one thing or another, you push through those sort of negative thoughts, and you know you can do this. You've done things. You've done a 16-hour session, and you coasted through that. You're an hour 9. So anyway, push through that, and with the help of even caffeine tablets, which I like coffee, and I don't need massive amounts of coffee, but I know the benefits that caffeine brings in. So I had a few caffeine tablets spaced out in my nutrition table, which actually really helped mentally. So it helped me give me a boost, not just in making me a bit more alert, but also in a sort of a mood. So that brought in sort of positive aspects. So then pushed through and even got to hour 20, 19, 20, and then hour 20, when you can start to see the lights, the end of the tunnel. Hour 20, I started, this is getting quite hard now. Not tired because I'd pushed through most of it. So hour 20 would have been, 2 o'clock in the morning. I didn't feel tired, like sleepy tired, but I just started to feel this is starting to hit me now. But I managed to push through that. Again, I had supporters coming in all the time, which is lovely because they'll have conversations. Which one if you start having conversations with people, albeit very much one way, it does help because your mind starts to sort of go off what you're sat on and pushing through the pain in the chair. And then I was getting to hour 22, and I was really, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I can do it. But again, just with the help of people talking to me, said, yeah, you'll be fine. It's just a mental game. And I stressed this before. It's with these things, you've done the prep, you've done the training. With Andy's help, I was in a really good physical condition. And I knew it was achievable. Even if I was doing it at a snail's pace, it doesn't matter, just keep going. And I just needed to get to that 24-hour slot. So at that end part, it was about mind over matter, just making sure you can do this. You're in a good physical condition, just push yourselves through it. And then we got to the 24 hours.
And are the obvious bits like sore bits, bum, shoulders?
Yeah. Do you know, it's a really good point. I thought throughout my training, I was doing really well. There's a few little niggles that came in, but I managed to get through those. And during the actual row, I think that because I sort of set myself this goal, you're going to do this, no matter what, you're going to finish it. I had niggles on my bum, obviously, because of the pressure that you're putting in your seat. And the rub. I was getting skin abrasions on my arse and all the rest of it, which are in my training. So I knew there was sort of, what's it called? Chamois or something. It's like a cream that cyclists use. I started to use that, which really helps. putting pads on my hands for the handles, so I knew where the pain points were going to be in terms of abrasions and sort of.
Was there any other solutions you found just while we were on that point?
Yeah, so first off is the seat. The seat on a Concept 2 row is quite hard. Whilst you can do a few hours and it doesn't really give you a problem, when you start into going 4 or 5 hours, having seat conditioning really helps. A seat cushion. So I had a seat pad that's from a sort of, I think Norwegian or Danish manufacturer, who are just some Olympic rowers who developed this sort of quite condensed foam seat, which was a massive help. But even then, when you get to 20 odd hours in that seat, I was adding sort of more cushioned towels. I even had, you can see on the sofa, I put a couple of these underneath. I was boosted like that by the end of it. But yeah, so that's the obvious point. All the other bits, they're just the contact points, really. Hands, I had pads on. I also ended up putting some tennis handle straps around the grips, which I don't know if you know, on a Concept 2 row, it's just like a sort of dense silicone over the handles. But on top of that, I'd added these sort of tennis handle grips, which really helped. My neighbor, he actually manufactured them, and he said, "Here you go, give me a few of them." So, which is great. Then back at the heels as well, which you don't realize, but they do move very slightly, and we're talking 10, 12 mil maybe. But that movement over a period of time, your back of your heels tend to rub. So I found that rather than using, I needed to have some trainers, for example, my footwear, which had strong bases at the back, which meant I wasn't rubbing as much. And then, of course, internal stuff, lower back. I don't want to admit too much, but I did take a couple of paracetamols throughout the session, throughout the 24-hour session. I try not to take medication too much that's going to numb sensations, but I took a few paracetamol.
Yeah, I just think though, when you do it, you don't want to take them all the time, but in something quite so extreme, you just got to think, well, needs must.
Yeah. And the last one I had was a shoulder injury, which I think we picked up on. I knew I had even during my training a little bit. So overhead presses, I was starting to think if I went heavy, I thought I could feel it. But during the row, because I set this goal, I knew that was my target. Here's what you're going to do to complete it. And I pretty much, even through as doing the row, I'll just push through it. So my lower back, I could feel it, I'll be fine. Shoulder, I'll push through it. So post row, having done it.
Yes, that was my next question. How did it feel first?
Yeah.
To finish, and then what?
Great.
And then So let's celebrate the achievement first, and then the recovery process.
If I'm honest, on completion, because I was so knackered, I kind of thought I've done it. And my neighbour was here in the office with me here, and he today said, you've rowed for 24 hours. And at the time it didn't really register. I thought, I've just done it now. I'm just pleased that I've managed to do what I set myself out to do and achieved it. But over the sort of next few days and maybe a couple of weeks, it started to sort of really sink in that I'd managed to do this achievement, which if anyone doing anything for 24 hours, even if you're walking for 24 hours, it's a feat in itself. As human beings, we're used to resting at nighttime. We take 16 hours of doing something and 8 hours of rest. Battling through that and knowing that the next day, which I certainly didn't appreciate when she told me, but the next day was my son's sports day, and Mrs. said, "You will be going to sports day." So I don't know how I will.
Oh no!
So, but I managed to go through it. And the next day was a bit of a fog, but it kind of didn't really. We're young. We were young once. We've stayed out sort of on the weekends, on nights out with the mates. So I thought I could stay up 24 hours if I had to, overnight, and just did it, and it wasn't a problem. So, but the following day, the following night, I had a really good night's sleep, honest. But no, it felt great. I had lots of celebrations.
I particularly enjoyed when you finished. Your wife kicked the balloons into. So it was streaming live on YouTube.
Yes, that's right.
So I woke up at about 5:45 just to check that he was
still
praying that he was still going. And at 6, there's just this big sort of 10 or so balloons got kicked in, and it was like, and it was great. It was really, I know. It was really brilliant.
I think she was also pleased that, thank God, his training's ending now and actually having back at the weekends to do jobs he needs to be doing around the house. So yeah, no, that was good. It was. I was really pleased when it finished. Really pleased that we managed to hit some decent targets for sort of raising money for the charity. Um, so I think, but
How long did it
post-row,
take for the bum to recover?
and I thought it would just take maybe a week and I'd be fine, but it took mostly a couple of months. So it's not just muscular. It almost felt like I'd bruised the bone. So it wasn't just the glutes that had taken a bit of a hit, albeit they'd been well massaged for 24 hours, but the bone itself. And whilst I'm not skinny, I'm not overly fat, so I don't have a massive amount of meat on my backside. So my um, the bone felt like it was sitting on the seat, and towards the back end, it felt like it was rubbing on the seat itself. My glutes had just been worn out. And I think my missus said that your bum's flat now. I'd never used to have a flat bum. I've always had a squatter's bum, but it got flat. And it took a couple of months for that to settle down. So yeah, I would say it took 2 months for my bum to settle down. I've still got a shoulder injury, which I think I'd just managed to mentally push through throughout the row. And it's like a repetitive strain injury for the whole time. And I almost feel like I'd torn something and not really realized it and just pushed through it. So I'm going through some recovery for that now, which is making me think. I know you're going to ask the question, what next in terms of my next challenge, which everyone who does a challenge will have something lined up. And I've been quite careful not to have anything lined up because it'd be very easy for me to fall back into that and obviously injure myself further. But
all right. So what would be, so if you were, I suppose these final couple of questions sort of merge into one. If you're going to do it again, what would you do differently? And secondly, if there was like 3 or 4 points that you would say, if someone was going to do this or was going to do something similar, it doesn't have to be a row, but it's a long-term thing. Is there any sort of gems of advice that you'd give them, maybe outside of the norm, but even, just your sort of basic stuff of like, you need to be doing this, and this.
Yeah. So the first question, what would I do differently? I think if I were to do this again, I would probably give myself a bit more time. I know that we gave ourselves 9 months, I think, from you and I starting our conversation to completion, around about 9 months. I would probably give myself a year to allow for myself to just really get myself mentally ready, and probably go during the row, be a bit more gentle on myself. I remember thinking, I'm pushing myself through this, and I didn't. Failure, whilst I said I was saying, telling to myself, failure wasn't an option. You will not fail. And I was trying to aim for some stupid world records, which I couldn't get. So I'd probably think, right, use yourself as a gauge to how good you can be, as opposed to gauging yourself against people who are managing extreme world records, who also great athletes. They were obviously 10, 20 years younger than me. So you're dealing with people who are somewhat younger. Advice, what I would do. So my first bit of advice, and it's not just because you're talking to me, Andy. I think the first thing I would say is get a coach. Bring yourself a coach on board. Don't, someone of my age and with my background, as you've spoken before, and many people are the same, is we've been coached before. We can understand, and we think we can probably do it ourselves without the sort of access to a coach. And you might have access to social media and YouTube, and you can listen to people talking. But if you've got someone on your side who can specifically guide you in relation to you as a person and what your own capacity is, that is extremely powerful. And it made a big difference to me, not just physically doing the row, but also knowing that I had someone fighting in my corner, was on my side, who I could call and say, Andy, look, I've got a problem here. I've got a back injury. How am I going to adapt my training now? Because I don't know what to do. I feel like I've buggered myself up. So that would be the first bit of advice: get a coach. I wrote a couple down, hopefully. Second bit of advice was going to be just try and make sure you're as efficient as you can possibly be. Make sure that whatever your challenge is, it can be as easy as possible. If you're doing a triathlon, make sure that those transitions you've got set up, everything's laid out. Your shoes are laid out, your socks are laid out, your food is easily accessible. just they sound like minor things when you're going through the list, but all added up, it just makes things yourself a lot easier. It's like if you're going to train, if you're going to go for a run or do something in the morning, just make sure the day beforehand, all your training stuff is laid out. So when you get up in the morning, it's one less thing to think about. So and make yourself as efficient as possible. And the last one is just understanding and accepting the fact that you can be as physically fit as can be. A lot of these things are about mind over matter. So making sure that you are mentally as strong as you can be, as well as physically. And it's really important, just making sure that you're going to go through these walls and you just need to be as strong as you can. It makes yourself as bulletproof as possible, really, in that respect. I'm quite lucky. Well, I say lucky, it depends how you look at it. I can compartmentalize things. My brain allows me to switch things off. So if I need to do a row, I can go straight into the row and not think about anything else. And that's not necessarily a superpower in some respects. My missus says it's not, because obviously she says, well, you forget about us. So I don't forget about you.
Yeah,
it's just I'm
everything
focusing. I'm focusing on something. So being able to compartmentalize is one thing that I help with the mind over matter.
Awesome. I think also, just to add to it from my perspective, is that, you know, if you're going to do something like this, as soon as you started within my training program, when things are done, the dates turn green, essentially.
Yeah.
So when the sessions are done, and you know, every single session from start to finish turned green with you. And I think that's a really key point as well, that if you're gonna do something like this, you know, you've got to commit to it. You know it's going to be hard, but you know, working with you was so enjoyable because you just did it. You know, I think sometimes you get people who just get shit done,
Yeah.
and then some people who don't. And I think if you're going to do something like this, you need to be either that person who's going to get it all done. You have to find a way, and it's got to become a real top priority. And I
Yeah.
think a lot of people underestimate how much of a priority it needs to be. And you know, and I think that was why it was such a pleasure, you know, helping you through it, because you're one of those people.
I think it's important, though. It's one of the things that I've always done throughout my life, is a case if I'm going to do something, I'll do it and I'll make sure it gets done. Don't get me wrong, there are some things that I am particularly bad at. But if it comes down to my physical training, knowing that how much I benefit from exercising on a daily basis, but not just physically, but mentally, I'll prioritize that over many things. And it's again, not always a good thing. But for me, it works. I know it works for me. And if you're setting me a goal to sort of do some exercise, then it's great. I'll go ahead and get it done.
Awesome. Well, mate, I think we're pretty much on an hour, which is pretty good. I think that's probably a decent time to finish. If anyone watching this has enjoyed it, it will be on hopefully YouTube and Spotify. So if you want to like, subscribe, comment, that would be absolutely fantastic. And mate, I appreciate having you on. It was a pleasure. Right, I'm just going to stop this
Yeah, thank you.
recording.